Hello, everyone, and welcome on this fabulous Thursday to this Fohr Diversity panel, Turning Education into Action, working with Black creators and influencers. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm Brittany Hennessy, and I am the head of community here at Fohr. I'll be moderating this fabulous four-part panel. And at the end, we'll make sure to provide you guys with some resources so that you can take what you learn here today and put it into action. So to set it off, we just want to let you know there'll be 4 topics. Topic number 1, we'll be talking setting your diversity initiatives up for success with Archel and Grace, and they will come on and tell you a little bit about themselves. Topic 2 will be casting an inclusive campaign without tokenism with Justin and Michaela. Topic 3 will be negotiating a high stakes environment with EJ and Kristen. And topic 4 will be building mutually beneficial partnerships with Danye and James, and they will be closing it out. If at any time you have any questions, feel free to pop them in the chat, talk amongst yourselves, and really we're happy you guys are here to discuss this topic a little more. We know it's been a little bit of time since June and everyone's looking for, okay, I've done what I can, let's get into the next steps. So without further ado, I want to welcome Archel and Grace into the Zoom.
Hi, can you see me and hear me?
Hi, Grace, we can see you and hear you. Hi, Archel, we can see you and hear you. Fantastic. Hi, guys, thanks so much. Okay, so before we kick off this topic, I just want both of you to just introduce yourselves, let us know who you are and what you do. And Archel, we can start with you.
Hi, everybody. My name is Archel Bernard. I am a fashion social entrepreneur based between Monrovia, Liberia, West Africa, and Atlanta, Georgia in the US. I am a boutique owner right now in Atlanta, Georgia. So if anybody's around there, I'd love to continue this conversation in person at any time. I'm just grateful to be here. Thank you.
Thank you. And Grace?
Awesome. Hi, everyone. I'm Grace Murray. I'm the VP of Strategy here at Fohr. I've been here for nearly 7 years at this point, so quite some time. And I can attest to our chat and masks. If anyone is in need of a new jaunty mask, I have about 5 at this point, and I get stopped and complimented on the street. So even if you're not in Atlanta and you just need something online, there's a little quick shout out for that as well.
Oh, I love it. Yeah, Archel, make sure you drop your link in the chat. In the chat if anybody wants to purchase a mask. So let's start with, let's again start at the beginning. So we're now in October, 2020, a lot has been going on in 2020. And in June, we really started to see, the catalyst of the Black Lives Matter movement. And then it really, as things move in circles that you don't expect them to, we ended up with a huge spotlight on diversity and influencer marketing. There was a lot of discussion on the pay disparity, which we'll get into later. And, I think a lot of brands realized, we're behind, we need to do what we need to do. Some brands, were happy with what they were doing, but knew they could do more. And as a whole, I think we can tell from the attendance in this type of panel, people are ready and willing to do the work, and they are just trying to figure out what those steps are. So Archel, I would love for you to talk a little bit about, you're a business owner, so you understand what brands are working with when they are trying to get initiatives together, but you're also an influencer, so you work with a lot of brands. Can you talk a little bit about why you are happy this discussion is happening and, the impact that firsthand Black influencers can have on businesses?
Thanks, Brittany. For me, I'm so happy and encouraged that this is a conversation that we're having more out in the open at this point, because I think Black people, a lot of times, we have to choose between keeping the peace or being honest about how we feel that racism has affected our lives and the trajectory of our careers and, what we're able to do and what rooms we're not invited into. So for me, what I'm so fortunate about is that I get to exist in a time where we can now have the conversations openly and honestly with everybody, my white peers can ask the questions, or even in as we all watch the news together, they know that I'm feeling something and can therefore reach out. Whereas it was something that we were meant to, all of these things were things that we were meant to deal with and kind of suffer in silence on our own. So if anything, I just feel that this movement has made us more connected. And I think that as brands begin to hire more Black creators, we're able to really put it together, to really truly be connected. And so what I'm just hopeful for is that these brands are recognizing that Black people are not just a marketing ploy or a quota to be filled, but we have individual voices, we have experiences that are different from anybody who may sit at your decision-making table. We have so many things that we can offer and things that we are proud to share as we do our work. And I'm just hopeful that more people will see the benefits of having Black voices and Black creators on their team beyond just looking like they're diverse.
I love that. And we're definitely going to get into, you know, moving beyond tokenism, just having the people there so you can check those boxes. And like you said, it's fantastic that these conversations are happening out in the open. And, you know, in order for this movement to be successful, you know, any sort of initiative has to tie back to KPIs. That's how you get funding for things. That's how you get buy-in from all the stakeholders at your company. Everyone watching this, if you need to go above board and, you know, get some additional resources to make these initiatives a reality, you're going to need to tie it back to business. So Grace, and we'll definitely hear from Archel as well on this topic, but Grace, if you could start with, at Fohr, how are you guys looking at, you know, brands having an increased interest in working with Black creators and tying that back to a KPI and just understanding how they're going to run campaigns in the future?
Yeah, so I mean, I think that so much of what makes any program successful is clear expectations from the beginning. So whether that's an internal initiative or a campaign that we're running on behalf of a brand, or if you're employing someone, literally anything in business is if there's clear expectations up front and you are providing that clarity to the person on the other end about how they can be successful, that is ultimately going to get you closer to that place or to that place. Or I think that, you know, Archel just briefly touched on, you know, filling quotas or checking boxes and that being the kind of first step. And I think that in the past couple of months, particularly with our work with the advisory board, I've really grown in an understanding of what that actually looks like and how I have been guilty of that as well, of thinking that we're doing the right thing, but then not necessarily thinking through the next step of the follow through. So we had, Archel and I've had an example in our advisory meetings where, you know, as an example, we were talking about offering up some spots for a Fohr subscription on a complimentary basis to Black-owned brands. And I was like, that's great. It's going to be amazing. We can just give people access. It's going to be awesome. And then bada bing, bada boom. That's great. And Archel pushed us to say, like, are you resourced to service those brands in the way that you would resource or service your clients? Mm-hmm. What type of brands are going to be successful when they have access to Fohr technology? You know, just kind of taking that first step and saying, like, here's this thing, you know, have access to it. And then that's it, really isn't doing anything at all. And I think that the direct parallel with influencer marketing there in terms of how we're casting campaigns is we can say, I think at this point, every brief that we get, which is great, from clients, there's a focus on diversity. So there's always going to be people on our campaigns who are people of color, who are Black. But what does that next step look like? And how do we make sure that success isn't just having that diverse group of people on the campaign, but actually setting them up to be successful, to make sure that we want to work with them again and that the content comes through and it's kind of hitting it out of the park. So I think it's just kind of not looking at success as taking that first step and realizing that it is just the first step, and instead thinking about how can I make this work and what do I need to do to make sure that I'm clear about my expectations and examining my expectations to make sure that they are clear and fair, basically.
Archel, can you add to that and also talk a little bit about influencers working with brands and brands being able to provide more than just money? Because we know money is available, maybe not in these unprecedented times, but in general, the cash flows freely in the influencer industry. So your thoughts on that?
I think, I think those conversations that I had with Grace and the rest of the members of the team at Fohr were so eye-opening, because I think here you see an organization that is really like, what can we do? When people see how many people of color feel slighted, the goodness in people is, I would like to react. What can I offer? How can I help? But it's not just the surface things that we have to give. We have to dig down to the root of the problems and see how we can address other things too. So that is it's just been really eye-opening as a whole conversation, and I'm really grateful for that. But I think also in influencer marketing, it's important to just allow the Black influencers to be themselves, create that space where they can be themselves, where they can use the language that they've been using, so that they create relatable content, just so that these companies can see how different things look when you're inclusive. It should change the way the brand looks. It should create a different sort of environment, because that's what happens when you shake things up. When you're including more people and more voices, things are bound to change. And I think that the more genuine the conversations are, and the more free the influencers are able to be with what they're putting out there, the better the return and the more the brand voice is going to sound inclusive. So I think that that's been a really important takeaway that I've observed this summer.
And I
love that takeaway. And, we're going to touch a little bit more on that in building the partnerships. And I think, part of the influencer landscape is figuring out how a campaign works with broader initiatives within the company. And, as someone who once sat on many influencer teams, I know that it's very difficult sometimes because, lots of times there's a huge budget and they're like, we have some money left. What can we do with this? Let's get some influencers. Mm-hmm. And so lots of times, the people watching this seminar, they're caught with a little bit of, all right, we've got to affect some change, but we're not really sure where this fits overall. So could you talk a little bit about maybe some things people working in influencer marketing can think about when figuring out how this particular campaign fits into an overall media plan and how to watch the KPIs?
Yeah, definitely. So I think a lot of the programs that we've been running are really long-term. So often it's kind of unrealistic for us to understand every single launch or announcement or, reaction that a brand might have over the span of a year in terms of, what conversations that brand is a part of. I think something that we've seen in the past couple of months has been that there's sometimes a little bit of conflation between brands realizing that if they're working with an influencer to promote a product, that's one thing, but sometimes the jump then becomes that influencer is now a part of a much larger conversation that brand is a part of, whether it's a positive one or a negative one as it relates to race. So a lot of brands have been, making commitments, making moves, making announcements, launching initiatives, but in an influencer accepting an offer to promote your lipstick or your moisturizer or whatever it might be, they're not necessarily saying, hey, here I am completely aligning with this brand on where they stand on the issue of race relations in America. So I think sometimes brands aren't, and we have just seen this a few times, where it's almost like you're hiring someone to attend an event, but then they arrive at the event and they realize they're the host and they're like, oh, wait, I didn't really realize this was now that my content was going to be repurposed in this way, or that you were going to launch this big initiative or announcement and that you were anticipating that it could, that it could become a larger part of a conversation, because it can then just put that influencer in a position where they're taking on additional work. They could be any backlash that the brand might be anticipating or experiencing could be diverted to the influencer. So I think that that broader picture of what is happening for the brand and the conversations that they're a part of and any moves that they're making that are tied to race is a really important consideration to have. And sometimes, it still is very separate to the actual partnership, and the expectation isn't that the influencer is going to be that host necessarily. But I think a heads up is still important, just to open the conversation and say, you've been a great partner so far. We just wanted to give you the heads up that this announcement's coming, or this conversation has started, or whatever it might be. We wanted to let you know in case any questions pop up, or in case any sentiment starts to, in case you start to be pulled into this conversation, let me know if anything pops up and I can be helpful, to just open that up and say, this wasn't the intention. Because I think that's kind of those two things of being a little confused by a lot of brands at the moment, either absent-mindedly or just it's just something that's kind of happening. So I think, does that answer your question, Brittany?
Yeah, it does. Archel, do you have something to add? I saw a lot of nodding.
No, I really, I think that just this conversation between the three of us is so indicative of basically how the conversations have been going now, right? We all recognize there's not one single path on the road to a revolution. And we're all taking our experiences and seeing how we can just level up, and as we, even right now in present day, if we look around the world, everybody is, there are struggles in every corner of the world right now. And so if we all take what we have and address what's going on in our neighborhood and see how we can contribute to just better, I guess, company cultures, and that starts also with influencer marketing and ambassador marketing. But if we all do what we can do, I think that for me is the biggest takeaway, because I think if we come from a side of kindness and openness and allowing people the space to show up as their true selves with all of their experiences, then I think that we will see a shift in the way brands market, in the way that companies communicate with each other, in the percentages of people of different backgrounds, different races, working and being employed by teams, or even being hired for shoots. I think that it all just trickles down. And so it just starts.
I love that answer. And so we have a few minutes left in this fantastic kickoff session. Grace, do you have a quick, you're gonna get an email full of takeaways. So there's a guide, don't feel like I missed that great thing Archel said, I missed that gem, Grace drop. We're gonna give them to you. But Grace, do you have your last word in just, what people can do to make sure this seminar is not the first and last thing, or is not the last thing that gets done in the company when looking at this issue?
Yeah, I think it comes back to what Archel just said about looking inward and trying to get to the root of the root of the problem, or the problems that are kind of happening consistently. So a big piece of that is understanding our own personal biases. And we have in the resource guide, we have broken down a couple of ways that comes to life in influencer marketing specifically. So much of when we were putting that guide together, we were looking at what we've learned about hiring bias and training there in a kind of more corporate, like hiring bias training, and how that applies specifically to influencer marketing. And that again comes back to KPIs of really thinking about what your goals are, really diving into examining your criteria and thinking to yourself, what am I trying to achieve in this campaign, and who's going to be the best person for it? And recognizing those little flags of where bias comes in, of things that are just about who you know, or who you like, or who feels similar to you, or who you follow, or who a friend follows. All of those things that happen in those biases that happen in hiring team members also happen in selecting influencers and engaging them. That bias can also then come to life in when you're reviewing content, if you haven't set clear KPIs and expectations at the start, to just say, oh, well, I just didn't really like this content, or it all comes into like subjectivity if you haven't set those clear criteria at the beginning of what you're looking for. So I think having those consistent checks back in on yourself to say, why am I recommending this person? Why do I like this content the most? Why is this resonating with me if this content over here is performing better? Or every single step of the process, there's opportunity for bias. And I think for all of us in the industry, it's really important to consistently examine that.
And we had a question from the audience, Annie, and I think this is a great question for Archel to end with. Can you just touch on, transparency? Because Annie's question is, we really try to be collaborative with our influencers. We really try to bring them in and let them know where we're at in terms of our KPIs and our diversity efforts. Can you just touch on like honesty when a brand is reaching out to you? Because I know that's a lot of what's stopping some brands, is knowing that, we haven't worked with, and I'm not going to name names, but there are quite a few brands that people can think of where, they haven't worked with influencers of color or Black influencers. And it really comes down to the first person who's going to send that email is like, what kind of response am I going to get? I don't want to reach out. And then it's like, well, you've never worked with us before. Why now? So can you just touch on like how brands should approach these conversations with an influencer, just in terms of like transparency?
Yeah. The first thing that I noticed, we'll say June 2nd, right? With so many Black faces popping up on people's timelines, and it wasn't diversity, it was desperation. And so we kind of have to shift that, right? So while you're, I think also choosing the verbiage, brands choosing proper verbiage that they use in these emails as they reach out to people, being considerate of what all is being brought to the table with influencers of color. And so when we talk about transparency, I just think it's more about how much do you try, and not just, I want to seem like I'm trying, but actually what is the effort that I'm putting in here? Because we take note of, okay, saw the Black square, saw the one mixed race chick, which leads into a whole conversation about colorism that we don't have time to get into. But I think it's really, truly, are you actually trying, or are you just wanting to look like you try just to cover your booty? So I think that, and a lot of times the conversations that we're talking about having are very hard to be had, right? So if you feel uncomfortable speaking out against racism outwardly, then how can you be an ally in practice? Because for so many of us, that's more valuable than just the Black squares and just the one or two Black and brown faces that you added to your feed. Because at this point, we hope that everybody has more than 4 or 5 Black friends that they can go to, but to ask, is this tone deaf, or is this okay? Or what are your thoughts on this? And how can I properly communicate this? But I think that if anything else, and this is how I'll wrap it up, communication is the best thing right now, right? Just trying the effort. And sometimes you will be met with, that's not the way you should do this. And then you just take a step back and say, I'm sorry to offend, because the only thing that will get in between you and getting better is the ego, right? And your ego is strongest if you don't want to learn. So I think that, really and truly, you have to be willing to communicate. You have to be willing to try. You have to be willing sometimes to be like, okay, I got it wrong on a small scale with this small circle of people that I, could chat with, in order to get it right for when I roll it out to the public. But so it's just a lot of checking the ego, making sure that your efforts are true and good. And of course, the kindness and compassion that I mentioned earlier.
Look at that perfect ending point. I love it. That's our first topic. And for anyone who heard that and was like, I hear you, but can I get a template? You're going to get one. So we're not going to leave you guys hanging. We'll have templates and charts and all sorts of lovely things in the resource guide. Thank you so much, Archel. Thank you so much, Grace, for your wisdom in this topic. And we're going to move on to topic 2. Thank you so much, Archel. Please drop the mask link. Drop the mask link. Drop it.
Now, y'all let me know when you need. I'm here. Okay.
All right. Bye. Okay, fantastic. So that was topic 1, setting up your diversity initiatives for success. And we're going to roll right into topic number 2, which is casting an inclusive campaign without tokenism. And this is something that, happens to a lot of people who mean well, but maybe don't have the know-how. And I've been in plenty of situations where, the one Black influencer hired looked around and said, oh, I'm the one Black influencer hired. And going into finishing 2020 and going to 2021, we know better, so we are going to do better. And I would like to welcome Justin and Michaela to Casting an Inclusive Campaign Without Tokenism.
Hello.
Hi, Justin. Hi, Michaela.
Hello, hello.
Hello. How you doing?
Good. Thank you so much for joining. And we're going to start it off the same way. Justin, tell us who you are and what you do. And Michaela, you can go right after.
Hi, everybody. My name is Justin Bridges. I am a fashion and lifestyle photographer based here in New York City. And what do? I did that part. And I also am a podcaster because of this quarantine. I started a podcast called Freelance Kills, where I help people with finance, career, and personal wellness.
I love it.
Cool. Hey, everyone. I'm Michaela Felix. I'm an account executive here at Fohr. I've been here for about a year and a half, and I work across pretty much any vertical you can think of. I've probably worked on it. So really excited to chat with you all today about this really important topic.
Fantastic. So in this topic, we're going to cover a few things. The first thing we're going to do is talk about how to get the right team in place and what teams should know. Then we'll get into a little bit, but what happens if you don't have the right team in place? Because that is a problem that a lot of people have. And then, we'll wrap it up talking a little bit about ways to just gut check against biases and make sure when you're casting your campaigns, you are doing the best job possible. So we're going to start with Justin. Can you talk a little bit about, what you think of just when people are thinking of casting a campaign, some of the things that they could miss? Because when we had a previous discussion, you had brought up, not only just having Black influencers, but what about having a Black creative director and other people who are participating in the concepts? So can you talk a little bit as a photographer on just the ecosystem of creativity and how people can put diversity into different parts, that everything's not riding just on the influencer?
For sure. When I think about this, I think about sort of the fact that we all have giant blind spots. Even as a Black person casting for my own shoots, I have blind spots to certain things that I don't have experiences with and of that nature. And so I think when we're thinking about whether it's casting an influencer or even a model for a photo shoot, you almost have to think about what are the things I could be missing instead of what is it that I want for this campaign. When I think about my experiences, a lot of the people that I work with, a lot of the brands that I work with that are predominantly owned by white individuals. And so when I walk into a campaign, what's informing how I talk to them about what it is that we need to cast for? And a lot of the times I'm thinking with a backwards vision. I'm looking at the brand and I'm saying, okay, all their imagery looks like this. They're definitely going to want something along this lines. So let me put forth talent that I think will fit within the brand DNA. But that also misses the whole point of, are we trying to push the brand forward? Are we trying to have a better conversation about the things that should be included? And I think that's the question I try to ask myself. What is it that I possibly could be missing? Is there a conversation that we're missing? Is there something that we need to be pushing forward? Do I want to have a brand, or do I want to work with people that just continually keep elevating the status quo, or do I want to be a brand that's actually making a splash, saying something, doing something, especially making commentary on what's going on in the world? And I think if you start from some sort of foundation and questioning why you're doing something, it helps sort of open up the blinders to what you could be doing differently and how you can improve the process, especially from an inclusivity point of view. I hope I answered that correctly for you.
You did. That was perfect. That was perfect. And I think you said some key words there, which are working within the brand DNA. And that's so much of what happens when you're casting. So many brands have the friends of the brand, and those tend to be people who let you check some boxes, but don't really push the brand forward. They're safe play in a dangerous space. And I think we saw a lot of that, immediately. Here came every website with the top Black influencers you should follow. And it was the same 25 to 50, if we got that high. Lovely women. I know a lot of them. They're great. They've been in the industry a long time. They've been working really hard. But it just was so crazy how everyone had the same people. And so, Michaela, can you talk a little bit about, you work across all the different areas. Can you talk a little bit about how you're a Black woman, but I'm sure when you have to cast white influencers, you can drop a long list of names. If you've got to cast, Asian influencers, Latina influencers for beauty products, whatever it is, part of your job is knowing the whole ecosystem of influencers and not just people you follow, which I think is what happens with a lot of people. It's not out of, there's no ill intent. It's just, these are the people I follow because I like this certain thing and I like their beauty tutorials because it's my shade range, and that makes sense. If you only have one type of person in a room, those influencer lists get repeatable very quickly. So can you talk a little bit about things brands can do to open up their perspective on who they're even considering when casting a diverse campaign?
Yeah, definitely. So even just you saying like it was the same names on every single list, the issue with that is that there are Black influencers for every single category at every single falling level. So it's not just, as you said, I'm a Black woman, I follow a wide array of Black creators, but for my white counterparts, what are you doing so that you're immersing yourself in that community that you want to contract people for? Are you keeping up to date with what's going on in the community, whether, everyone who's using Hot Girl Summer, but do these companies even know who Megan Thee Stallion is? Like, you want to make sure that you're actually doing the research and even thinking about timing for campaigns. Let's think about current events in terms of, what's going on in Nigeria. Do you really think now's the time that you want to email 15 Black influencers to post by next Wednesday when there's so much going on in the Black ecosystem? So I think it's just really being able to, follow people outside of your network, because you don't want to keep following the same 30 white influencers and the same 5 Black influencers, because you're not going to get the same perspective from everyone. So I think it's really about, are you going through hashtags? Are you utilizing Fohr's platform and doing searches? I think there's just so many ways that people can broaden their perspective outside of, the 35 of, 30 white, 5 Black, or, whatever culture you want to tap into. You just have to actively do the research, whether it's, again, are you reading the publications that Black women are reading right now? Whether, are you looking at Essence? What are you doing that is outside of your normal bubble that you can actually organically tap into the culture and actively with these influencers, where it does me June 5th, because on June 2nd, they posted their Black square. So I think if they're actively doing the research on Instagram, on TikTok, what are the trends? Being able to accurately research that and not make it feel inauthentic, which I think is where the line gets a little blurry, is that people think they have to be more reactive than proactive. And I talked about this a bit in our advisory board meeting, but taking a step back and looking at, is your product even fit for the Black community? So, before even diving into like, let's get 30 Black influencers for this product, what is the Black community saying about your type of product? For example, sunscreens is a really easy one. Is your product known to have a white cast? Typically, if it does, then you don't want to go and email 15 Black influencers to promote it, because they already know, like, oh, I actually don't use that brand because it's known to have a white cast and on darker skin. Like, it just doesn't make sense. I can't tell my audience to go use that. That's inauthentic for their audience. So I think being able to keep your ear to the ground and figure out, like, okay, like, we actually do have a problem with this product. Maybe we shouldn't activate right now until we chat with our product team. So knowing things like that, where you can authentically tap into the community and know it's a right fit, I think is the best way to go about that.
Sure. I think that's a great idea. And I was going to I was going to tee you up for that tidbit, and you just came through with it. So fantastic. And don't be afraid to plug Fohr. That's why we're here, because Fohr is amazing. And again, all the things we were talking about, you're going to get a lovely resource guide just in case you missed something that is said. So Justin, let's talk a little bit. So Michaela pointed out doing some of that research, making sure that you got your ear to the ground, and companies can do that and still miss the mark when presenting materials. For example, reaching out to Black influencers with a mood board, and no one in the mood board is Black. So can you talk a little bit about, some of those tactical things that you know in terms of production that people can do just to make sure once they've done their research that they don't undo all of that work with a misstep in terms of providing materials for the campaign.
Yeah, I mean, there are so many different steps depending on what the production is. And obviously, it is hard to make sure that throughout the whole process that you nail every single thing. But I think when it comes to visuals, I mean, we all work in an industry that's heavy on visuals. When you're considering things like putting out a mood board or brand guidelines or things like that, it's good to think, who is this material for? If this is for a Black influencer, and I don't, any person of color as an influencer, have I included images that they can relate to? I mean, what you're doing on the brand side is you're creating assets for the brand, whether it be social, campaign, whatever it is, that your customers will look at and go, I could see myself in that, or I could see myself using that, or I relate to that project, or I relate to that product or story. And that's the same thing influencers or people that are photographers wanting to shoot for the brand. That's the thing we all care about. Can I relate to this brand story? Is this a brand that I feel comfortable working with and want to work with? Can I be excited by this? And so when you're putting out mood boards, when you're putting even the way you write the email or being conscious of what's going on in the world, if you're asking somebody to post during a George Floyd march or something like that, thinking about those things and the audience that you're sending those materials to is such a huge step. And I think it kind of links what you're saying, what we're talking about with mood boards, also links back to what you're saying in the first question that I failed to mention is if your brand doesn't have that kind of diversity inside of itself, and you're looking to influencers to help outsource that, it's also worthy of asking the question, when we're looking for new hires, if we're looking for, somebody leaves the company and we have an opportunity to hire somebody and infuse some of these things at the core, are we actually doing the best job we can to cast that net a little wider? And so thank you for the opportunity to circle back and bring that in. But I think it's just as long as you have your visual materials and you're asking yourself, and I'm going to say a series of questions during this thing, but if you're asking yourself, am I speaking to the audience that I'm sending it to? And that audience is probably going to be just one person, but that one person matters, especially if you're spending money on them and want them to provide the ROI that you're looking for.
That's perfection. And I like that you circle back to include that, because that is a point we wanted to make sure we got across. And Michaela, piggybacking off of that, can you talk a little bit and also going back to when we were saying the same people about brands casting their net even wider? Because even if you're doing, even if it's a beauty product, plenty of people use beauty products who are not beauty influencers. And I know Fohr has categories of people that they can churn out where you can find your perfect match outside of a very small group, which will also keep people from reusing the same 25 influencers. So can you talk a little bit about casting that net outside of your typical fashion and beauty influencer?
Yeah, I think from there we land in kind of that lifestyle category where, as you said, maybe they're not solely talking about fashion, they're not solely talking about beauty, but realistically, this is something that may pop up on their feed from time to time, and their audience, may think about it a bit like, oh, this person looks really great in this lipstick, but they're not known for beauty. The great thing about Black influencers, especially speaking about the beauty category, because realistically, Black women spend upwards, I think, of about $3 billion in beauty every year. So you're missing out on an untapped market when you're not looking at these Black beauty influencers who could be part of your marketing plan. But in terms of, and sorry if I'm deviating from the point, the influencers that may not be in that niche, there is a niche. You can't say that there isn't, if that makes sense. So basically, the lifestyle influencer, she travels still, she shares that with her audience. So I think being realistic about, maybe you can't afford the 100K follower beauty influencer. There's a 5K, there's a 10K, there's the 25K who can get the job done and still reach that targeted audience that you're looking for, who may not be specifically posting about, solely beauty, solely fashion, solely lifestyle, because there is so much encompassed in their content, if that makes sense. And sorry if that didn't answer the question. If you provide more context there.
No, that makes perfect sense. I think I worked with a very large food brand, and they had said to me, we've used all of the cooking influencers that we want to activate. Do you have ideas? I was like, yeah, anybody, because every influencer eats. And it like blew their minds. They were like, oh, right, because everyone buys food. And it's so interesting how like you really can get wrapped up in your own very specific circle of this is who uses our product, when you can completely miss like the DJ, the small business owner, the photographer, the mom, all these people who may not normally end up on your radar, but who would be perfect, and that will help you diversify your roster. So, Michaela, any closing thoughts on what people should be taking away from when they're thinking about casting?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is just in terms of cultural competency is like the one phrase that I thought of when we were talking about this topic, is that you really need to do your research and you really need to make the effort to understand the communities that you're trying to engage with, because if you don't, it does end up being tokenism. The influencer, you won't even get the opportunity to tap into that bucket of influencers because they won't feel comfortable working with you. They'll feel like they are just, again, a checkbox that you've hit on your list of types of people to tap into. So I think really understanding the community that you want to engage with, doing your research, keeping your ear to the ground to make sure that the partnerships that you're looking to activate actually make sense for your brand, and are as organic as possible, so that influencers aren't turning a side eye and saying, why are you reaching out to me when you only have 3 shades? Like, that doesn't make sense. So really making sure that you're doing your research there.
I love that takeaway. And Justin, any final takeaways from you?
Yeah, something you both just said brought up a good point, and I'll leave with this cultivation. When I started on Instagram a long time ago, it was first in that Tumblr era. I was a blogger. I was doing the whole thing. And one of the things that I remember from that era was that the reason I wanted to work with brands was not just because I could make money, but because it would get me out there too. It was an opportunity to grow my platform, talk to more brands, learn more things, get access to different areas of life in the blogging and influencer category. And one of the things that I think people should take away, not only with how you present your materials to influencers or how you think about casting people, is when you're thinking about you've run out of these people that are on the list, and you have to start looking at the micro influencers, for instance, or a 5K, a 10K, a 15K, whatever. Think about the opportunity not only to help that person grow their platform, because if you cultivate somebody, you create somebody that's going to be loyal to your brand and will always want to work for you, will almost instinctually push the things that you want push because they just love working with the brand. You're actually creating an ROI that has a lasting effect. It's got residual. That's not just this one transactional opportunity to spend X amount of dollars on somebody and hope that they reach the 10,000 people you're thing. So I think I don't want to make it sound philanthropic. There's a two-way street here, and I think it's helpful for us to think about it both ways instead of just what's the transaction and how do I speak to the person in a way that makes them feel comfortable. And that's what I'd leave it with.
I love it. You guys were fantastic. So thank you so much, Michaela. Thank you so much, Justin, and for everybody watching. It may seem a little daunting that you've got to shake up the way you do your work. But everybody has to remember, we're in an industry that didn't even exist 15 years ago. Like, most of us were probably in PR or at a print magazine wondering how, why. So many people were in finance. And we came to influencer marketing and we figured it out. We're making it work. We're figuring out metrics. Remember when we didn't even have demographics? Remember when we didn't know somebody's engagement rate? Like, we've come a long way, and this is just another piece of the puzzle that once we lock it down, the industry as a whole will see the benefit. So thank you both so much for all your insight. Again, lots of things that were said. We're going to put a nice resource guide for everybody, and we are going to take 5 before we get to topic 3. Thank you so much, Michaela and Justin. All right, everyone, we are back. Thank you so much. And we're on to topic number 3, which is negotiating in a high stakes environment. And let's welcome Kristen and EJ.
Hi.
Hello. Thank you both for being here with us. And as we've done with the previous 2, let me know a little bit about who you are and what you do. And EJ, we'll start with you.
Awesome. I'm wearing my money green. Since we're talking about money, I'm going to manifest, all the bags for our Black
I love it.
Creators. But I'm Ernest James, also professionally known as EJ. I'm the founder and chief management officer at Noir Management, which is a diversity inclusive talent marketing communications agency.
Fantastic. And Kristen?
Hi, everyone. My name is Kristen Singer. My pronouns are they, them. I'm new to Fohr, about 2 months in, coming in as Vice President of Client Services to oversee our campaigns team, and I'm really looking forward to being part of this discussion.
Fantastic. So I know this is the topic a lot of people have been waiting for, because money in the influencer space is always a good conversation. And you add diversity on top of that, you got buzzword jackpot. But we're going to get down to like the nitty gritty of it. And EJ, I want to start with you, and let's talk a little bit about how we are finally in an industry where I think Black creators are getting their due, they're getting the attention they deserve. And because they are a hot commodity, like every other, commodity, when it is in demand and scarce, prices go up. And I think a lot of brands are getting a little bit of sticker shock when reaching out to some Black creators. And we've talked about this in numerous discussions, but, instead of, no one wants to offend. We live in a very sensitive time. You don't want to offend. You don't want to get canceled. An influencer is the last person a brand wants to piss off. And so, they end up with a little bit of we're going in a different direction when met with a price that's too high. So this is your day-to-day. Can you talk a little bit about, when you've encountered this instance, what do you wish brands did instead of just balking when you send them a fair price from an influencer?
I think, and when you say, Black influencers are at a premium, basically, yes, it costs a premium to come to the cookout now, right? Like, you've never wanted to come, you've had no interest in attending, but now all the brands want to come to the cookout, and that ticket is premium. I was talking to Kristen yesterday. I said, it's kind of like going to the club and you've missed when it was open and free, and now you have to pay at the door. So, I wish that a lot of brands would kind of keep into consideration or take into consideration the price of someone's influence. We are trading human commodity. We are trading what a human being thinks and says at value, and adding a monetary value to it. And what's happening is a lot of brands have for too long decided that they know how much a Black influencer should be receiving or shouldn't be receiving. And now that they don't know, and they're being called out for not knowing, and we know they don't know because they haven't had these voices or representation in their campaigns, they're shocked by how much it's costing. And it's like, rather than saying, oh, we're going in a different direction, how about being a little bit more flexible in the scope? If you want representation, let's focus on representation and less on impressions. So having that conversation and maybe, working with your Fohr partner team to say, let's not focus on hitting impressions and having this amount of promotional units in the campaign. Let's just have really representative, inclusive, authentically engaging voices and content. And over time, I think we'll get to a space and a place where brands feel that they understand how much influencing costs, no matter the color of skin that an influencer is. That's what I'm really hoping things like this can really help create a conversation that says influencing is a profession, it's a job, and what we want is just a really inclusive content strategy as opposed to a really high engaging promotional unit mix.
I like that. I think it's a very interesting takeaway, because when influencer marketing, when we first started and we didn't have all these metrics, it really just was, we want this person's face. We like how they look. We want them wearing our clothing. We want them using our moisturizer. We want the association. And I think then, with tools like Fohr, which are fantastic because they did give us the ability to balloon budgets, because you could tie it back to ROI. But I think a lot of brands then, the pendulum swung too far the other way. And then a lot of brands really are KPI centric, which is important, but also when you have something that maybe you're trying to turn a page, you've got to loosen that a little bit. And maybe if your goal is diversity, like you said, to bring maybe the scope down or something like that. But Kristen, can you talk a little bit about what brands can do when they don't have that option? Because as we know, in a perfect world, a brand can say, we really want this influencer, and we can only get one Instagram post, so let's do that. But plenty of times that is not the case. They have metrics they have to hit, which have been passed on to you. So you have metrics you have to hit. So what can brands do to still carry on that diversity when the budget might be a limit?
Yeah, and thanks, Brittany, and thanks, EJ. I mean, that's a lot of what we're dealing with here at Fohr, and we're building that muscle of our own, and really taking learnings and applying them situation by situation. But I think just before I get into that, which is really around negotiation being an art form, I think as brands are pursuing diversity initiatives focused on engaging Black influencers, going back to EJ's point, we need to acknowledge that a lot of brands are knocking on doors they were never knocking on before. And that's across the board for Black influencers. So in a supply and demand market, demand is at an all-time high. And beyond demand, I think there's a question of that brands and that we ourselves and brands can ask ourselves, like, around how are we valuing these partnerships? And does your brand fully believe in the value Black creators provide as the trendsetters and culture creators that they are? And like, if you aren't able to meet the market where it's at, is the brand really putting the right support behind these said diversity initiatives? And these are, of course, guiding questions and considerations that our team and I'm sure brands are really having to ask themselves. But, you know, in the scenario where, you know, budgets are where they are, again, negotiation is an art, and it's certainly a skill that can be cultivated on brand teams at the end of the day. And it should never be cut and dry, yes or no. I think influencers are businesses in and of themselves. So they're looking to make deals and they're looking to reach agreements. And I think we just need to get creative. So I mean, our resource guide will talk through sort of negotiation in a bit more detail, but at a high level, in my mind, it's about finding a compromise that all parties are happy with. And if you as a brand have made it clear that you want to work with a specific Black influencer, but budgets are limited, then can we work to restructure deliverables? Can we look at levers around exclusivity or usage? You know, can we explore varying options to find a sweet spot needed to secure the desired influencers? And most times, there's a deal that can be struck. And
I agree with that. Oh, go ahead.
Well, go ahead. I was going to get into what happens when we can't strike a deal, but we can table that.
Well, I was going to say, you know, I agree with you because I've sent plenty of emails, you know, for people, and you know, you send out a price, you send out a scope, and sometimes the answer is just no, we can't do that. And it's like, no, you can't do which part? Like, this is a 6-part email. I'm sure something in here works. And I think, you know, that's something brands have to remember is if the goal is to get said influencer or the goal is to have a certain level of representation, if that's the piece that has to stay, then the other pieces at some point have to be flexible because everything can't be a variable or you end up with a hot mess at the end, which is where a lot of brands find themselves. And we don't want them to be there. We want them to figure out how to do it. But Kristen, I'll let you go back to your point about what happens when you can't.
Yeah, I mean, I think in the instances where an agreement can't be reached, there are definitely do's and don'ts. Those will be in the guide. But you know, too often, like we've talked about, Black creators are given the old "we're moving in a different direction," which really isn't providing any real direct feedback. And I think if we think about the importance of building relationships really between brands and influencers that they want to work with, this might not leave the best taste in the influencer's mouth and doesn't really build a foundation to potentially work together in the future. And I think that's where we at Fohr are always thinking about is, you know, we build these relationships and often it can't work out at one point and it does in the future. So thinking in that sort of future facing terms, I think the messaging and communication is really key. Instead of like, wow, that's too expensive, we're moving in a different direction. We at Fohr, again, have really focused on disengaging in a way that, again, still leaves opportunity for future partnerships. So, you know, as much as we would love to make this work, we have this set budget and these KPIs that we need to hit across these channels. And if we go beyond a certain dollar amount, it will jeopardize our ability to meet those goals. That said, we'd love to find something that can work within this budget. And then, of course, totally understand if not, and would like to keep you in mind for future opportunities. So I think a lot of that just comes back to how are you dialoguing, and are you just ghosting influencers when it gets uncomfortable or when it seems like something can't be met?
That's so important.
EJ, can you talk a little bit about that? And really, I'm
Yeah.
just teeing you up for the Hermes analogy. So,
Of course,
because it's
because I
so good.
always tell people, like, Hermes never goes on sale, right? It's like you go into Hermes, there are no prices, so you have to ask how much things are. And when you go into a certain section, there's already a perceived value in the handbag section. So you're kind of in your mind thinking, this is going to be expensive until you see it and you ask and they tell you how much it is. And you're like, oh, take me to the keychains. I can't afford the Birkin. Where's the keychains? And it's kind of like value doesn't change because you can't afford it. It just means you can't afford it. They're not lowering their prices to make it affordable to you. So now you need to start to play in the spaces that you can afford. It's, you know, the same with the real estate agent. You have $1 million, you'll see $1 million homes. But if you only have $300,000, we're not going to the $1 million homes because you can't afford them. And there's no way we're going to be able to get the seller to take down all these things to make the $1 million work within your budget. And I think brands have to start to take this mindset and use this analogy of things have a cost. And that's why I think when we are talking about the wheeling and dealing of human commodity and influence, we think that because it's a person who has an emotional attachment to not having enough jobs or not getting enough of the jobs at the rate that they are owed, then they'll just take this $500 because they haven't worked in 3 months. It's like, no, you can't. We're creating a vicious cycle where Black influencers unfortunately have to take jobs at rates that they necessarily would never do a job at. And so the balance and the market price becomes off balance because you have so many Black influencers not receiving jobs or receiving jobs at the rates that they wouldn't normally accept, that they've now made it difficult for another Black influencer to come and ask for a rate that would be applicable and fair for the scope of work. So we're really doing a lot of back work to try to like right the wrongs of not having enough jobs and not offering influencers, especially Black influencers, their fair rate. And so I think if, to Kristen's point, if we can find ways that we negotiation is such an art form, you know what I mean? Like FBI teaches negotiation for high impact situations. And so when we think about this, we have to say, we can afford that rate. So our scope needs to be negotiable because just like Hermes, if your budget can't afford the Birkin bag, you can get the keychain with this budget. Let's find the keychain of influence when it comes to what our budgets actually can afford.
Yeah, I think that's a good point because, you know, I think when brands are looking at rates, and lots of times, you know, a friend of a brand, like if an influencer really does love a brand and they really do want to work with them, you see that across races. You will
Absolutely.
see an influencer, you know, give a brand a discount because it's a brand they truly love, which is what all brands want from their influencer partners. And I think across the board, it's just something for brands to remember that just because you were given a discount this time, don't automatically assume that's the price the next time. To just go back and, you know, the influencer might have grown or they were doing you a favor. And I don't want to say start each negotiation like fresh because you do have background knowledge, but just to make sure that, you know, we're in pandemic pricing. That doesn't mean come January that prices won't go back up across the board. So just being mindful of influencers lowering their prices because they do really want to work with the brand because they love them and know that your product or service will provide value to their audience, which is their main job. Sponsored content is secondary. They're supposed to provide value first. And I know I want to make sure Kristen can get her point in, but I want to make sure we hit the part of the high stakes environment, which is just talking a little bit about whitelisting and how, you know, with diversity initiatives, it brings upon its own problems, which are when you are taking, you know, content created by a Black creator and maybe sending it to your audience, hoping that they'll see that you are now a diverse brand. And there are some unintended consequences there. So Kristen, can you get in your earlier point that you wanted to, and then just touch on the whitelisting? And I know we've got some guides in the resource.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say, I think in relation to the Hermes example, I think, again, Fohr is also looking at, Fohr is looking to be on the forefront, excuse my pun, of the negotiation process for our brands, given our experience there. But I think it goes back to what Michaela was even saying is, you know, if your list is so limited to only these influencers and you get locked into you get gridlocked and can't move forward, that could be potentially because you haven't really expanded, you know, the search enough. And so I think another aspect of what we look to do it for is have options, you know, and be able to be flexible within a scope, and then be able to come to brands with, okay, we couldn't make it work here, but we have these other groups to take a look at. So that was just that point. I think on the whitelisting, I mean, for me, that there's this, in this environment, I think that there's a risk, there's somewhat of a risk associated with putting out content for certain brands for Black influencers. And, you know, when we see a conservative brand tap into Black influencers to really market to their audiences, I mean, it's completely reasonable. And we would hope that conservative brands are really looking to expand their product sets, expand their customer sets, and, you know, tap into Black buying power and the Black community. But, you know, when you engage an influencer to talk to their community, that's one thing. But when you pull that influencer onto your own community and you haven't done the due diligence of grooming that community, potentially weeding out some of that community, there's a risk associated. We have seen firsthand backlash on influencers, you know, with the seriousness of, you know, death threats. So I think that, you know, all of that is part of the consideration when we are thinking about how to best engage with Black influencers, going back to making sure they understand the bigger picture they're part of, thinking about the pricing, and really just, you know, the state of the union that we're operating within.
I love that. And EJ, can you close out this fantastic topic with what you want brands to take away from this segment, but also this conversation as a whole?
Yeah, I think, you know, listen, a not right now or a no to a brand deal, because I think a lot of times I want to make sure that it's clear that, yes, brands have walked away from a lot of deals, but a lot of influencers are walking away from a lot of deals because the rates just aren't respectable. And when an influencer has that power, especially a Black influencer, knowing that ticket to that cookout comes with a high rate, when they say no to you, it isn't a slap in the face. It isn't a sign of disrespect. It's I know my value and I know what my influence brings to this industry and what it could do for your brand. And unfortunately, you're not able to afford the Birkin. Come back to me when your budget's a little higher. You know, let's work together. Let's figure it out. And so I'm hoping that brands take from this entire conversation, it's not the door is closed on working with Black influencers. Beware, they're so expensive. It's let's mutually come to the table to understand, what can you do for me? Because you know all the things I can do for you. We've made it very clear, from being on the seating list without being paid and constantly being seated product and giving these amazing unboxings. But now it's, hey, we want to work with you. We want to be fair to you. What's the first step in being fair? And if we keep the lines of communication open, I think we can really get to a space and a place where everyone just feels like it's a partnership. A partnership is not a dictatorship. We want a partnership. A mutually beneficial partnership is what can come out of conversations like this and partnerships with Fohr.
So I'm going to stop you right there, because that is topic 4, building mutually beneficial partnerships. So perfect ending. Thank you so much, Kristen. Thank you so much, EJ, for your insights. Again, lots of information on whitelisting, on figuring out your paid strategy, on negotiation tactics, all going to be in the fantastic resource guide. So, like we said, topic 4, building mutually beneficial partnerships. I want to welcome Danye and, you all know, James. This is me doing my little dance while I wait for them to come on. There's Danye, there's James. Hi, everyone. How are you guys doing? James, you're on mute. We want to make sure we don't miss anything.
Yep.
There you
Hello?
are. Hello, Danye, can we do a mic check for you? Oh, we can't hear you. Let's fix that. But while Danye is fixing that, we know you, James, but just give us the rundown, who you are, what you do.
Yeah, so my name is James Nord. I started this company almost 8 years ago. And Yeah, I'm super excited to be here. Excited for y'all to hear from Danye. I'm gonna do my best to not talk too much, although I have a proclivity towards running my mouth. But when Danye gets in here,
Hey,
we'll make
so
sure.
mic check
There we
1,
go.
2.
Oh, we got you. Hi, Danye. Can you
Hey.
let us know who you are and what you do?
Hey, so my name is Danye Taylor. I run a creative agency called The Digital Footprint. And what we do is we work with typically like smaller brands, and we build out their social media strategy, help them build their brand and kind of like their voice in the digital space. And also too, I have like this weird hybrid because I'm also on the influencer side as well. So while I work with clients, I also work with brands. So my perspective on this space is pretty unique. So I'm excited to.
Yeah, I love it. I mean, that's really why we have you closing it out, because you have a unique perspective and that you understand how both sides of the fence work. So let's talk a little bit about, this is the closing session. We've gone through how to start thinking about working with Black influencers, how to make sure your casting is fair, how to make sure your negotiation tactics work, and you've taken paid media into consideration. But I think the thread that goes through all of this is making sure that the partnership is mutually beneficial, and also that whatever content is being created is both on brand but resonates with the influencer's audience. So Danye, can you talk a little bit about, you were saying like, you don't want the brand to seem like they're trying too hard. It should be natural. It should also be natural for the influencer. So can you talk a little bit about, what would you say are some best practices for engaging with an influencer and making sure the influencer's voice is still heard?
So for brands, I would highly recommend brands doing their research on the actual influencer that they're reaching out to beyond their followers. So you see that they have a good engagement rate, they have a lot of followers, but I would take note as to what type of content they are producing. So a brand may be able to look at something and be like, you know what, like when this influencer does a lot of lifestyle content in this setting, they typically get higher engagement, or when they do an infographic or whatever, they get higher engagement. Then at that point, the brand can now approach that influencer and say, hey, like, we love the post that you do X, Y, and Z. We think it would be really cool if you did an infographic talking about this, instead of bringing something to them that they don't really see on their page just because they think, okay, they have a lot of followers, so this will do good traffic. So just doing research on what type of content is really performing well for that influencer and figuring out a good hybrid that works for your brand.
And James, can you talk a little bit just what you're seeing in terms of industry shifts? Because we know in the very beginning of influencer marketing, there was a lot of the holding the product right up to the screen, and it was poorly integrated. Then, like I like to say, the pendulum really swung the other way, where you ended up with beautiful lifestyle shots, but you were like, where is the product in this photo? And now we're kind of finding that happy medium. How do you see influencers in general, but also Black influencers, how do you see them currently integrating product, especially since sets aren't as glam as they used to be?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think for us and for our clients, like the goal is to be persuasive, right? Like we understand that we're selling product, and we're introducing a brand or talking about a brand to an audience. And so our goal is for that message to be as persuasive as possible. And that means understanding deeply what is going to persuade that audience. And so if you ask yourself, who is best suited to tell me how to persuade this audience, it's probably the person that built it, And so that's why it's so important that these partnerships are actual partnerships. It's not an actual partnership if you pay somebody and tell them exactly what to say and how to shoot something and you don't get any of their feedback, right? That's not a partnership. That's placing an ad onto somebody's Instagram page. That's not what you're paying for. And so it's so important to listen to the creator, listen to the influencer that you're working with on how they think they can best persuade that audience. And sometimes that might fall outside of the way you thought it should be communicated, especially if you're working, you know, with influencers that are operating in a culture that you know, you don't understand deeply. And I think you have to be open. That's what Danya is saying about research and about really understanding. But there's no one who understands it better than that influencer. And I think that's why you got to really listen.
Yeah, I totally agree. So Danya, can you talk a little bit, when we had spoken earlier, you gave an example of like a brand coming to an influencer, asking them like, this is what we're trying to do. What are your thoughts? As opposed to like, here's a script, run this down. Can you talk a little bit, both as someone who builds digital communities, but also someone who has cultivated one, in your mind, what's the perfect way for a brand to approach you when they want to work with you and they want to tap into your specific audience?
Well, what makes me excited is when brands, number one, they come to me and then they're telling me like I can tell when the email is like copy and paste versus when I know that somebody actually did their research on me. So I've had a brand approach me and they said, hey, Danya, we really like your profile and how like your audience is kind of, you know, like Black millennial creative entrepreneurs. We like that, you know, you provide them with tips and advice in the business space, and we would love to use that to promote X, Y, and Z. So for me reading that email, I can tell that they didn't just look at my followers, they actually skimmed through and they like took note as to who was engaging with me, how I was engaging with them, and the type of information that I was putting out. So number one, just showing that they have an interest and that it's aligned. I feel like sometimes brands just want to reach out to people for the following, and then there is no alignment. It's like when beauty brands reach out to me to promote like makeup, I feel like that was just a miss because I'm not really in that space. Like you wouldn't see me promoting lip gloss or lipstick or, you know, like doing my makeup. So I feel like when brands that are not aligned with what I promote and what I'm about, it's just a huge turnoff because I'm like, wow, like kind of like dating. It's like, you're not even my type, like based on the, you know what I mean? That's how I kind of look at it. So just when brands approach me like that, kind of gives me the cold shoulder.
I think that's, you know, that's influencer marketing is so much like dating. It's exactly that. You know, I think if you had to pick an analogy, that's what it is. So James, you know, so much of what Fohr does is they do help brands find the right match. So can you give us like a best practice, especially as, you know, some brands are jumping the gun and they're like, we want a list of brown people. Like, we don't even care. Like, if they don't wear makeup, whatever. I need this list to have more Black faces on it. That's a great gut feeling that you realized you were lacking something, but then you have to do the next step of like doing it the proper way. So can you give some constraints on when brands are trying to diversify, how they can do that without missing the mark, like Danya said?
Yeah, I mean, I think that I believe it was Archel that said, you know, in any kind of subcategory of influencer, there's a Black influencer, and it just, you know, it takes that time, and then I think that the criteria for picking an influencer, you know, whether that is Black or non-Black, or should be the same, right? You need to find somebody that you think can tell the story of that brand or product really well, and so. You know, for Danya, let's say that it was a makeup brand that wanted to work with her. You know, I think that to have that story make sense, it has to be about her work. Right? It has to be about how busy she is and the life that she leads as an entrepreneur and an influencer, and not about, you know, look how transformative this look is, but that I have this really busy life. And that means I don't have a lot of time to maybe do my makeup or fuss around with this stuff. And so this product is perfect for me. And so for us, we always look at like, what is the benefit that this product is, you know, what product benefit are we promoting? And what are the stories we can find to help illuminate or to help show that benefit in a way that feels really authentic? And so you're always looking for stories, and to find those stories, you have to understand the cultures and the places where you're operating, and you have to do the research to figure out where that bridge is going to be, you know, and I think zooming out from that, you have to have an actual strategy. You know, it's not about just getting someone to talk about your product. It's about getting someone to tell a compelling story about your product. And those are two pretty different things. The second one is definitely harder, but it gets a lot easier when you find the right partner, which I think is, what we're talking about here.
Yeah, finding the right partner is definitely key, but I think even before you go do that, you have to make sure what is available for the potential influencer to see is correct. And so Archel and Michael were talking about, when I go look at your brand, your Instagram feed, do I see Black influencers? And have you been consistent as opposed to just having a bunch in June? And, Danya, can you talk a little bit, since you're helping brands build their digital presence, aside from casting influencers, before they even get to that, what can brands do to make sure when they get that they send that email to an influencer and they go check out their feed, what can they do on an organic level to make sure that that email will be well received?
Well, I feel like with any brands outside of influencer marketing in general, you never want to look like you're selling too much. It's more so about selling the lifestyle instead of selling the product. So when I go on certain pages, I like to see the community that the brand has built. I don't want to just see all product and everything that just says, buy this now, buy this now. I want to see how people are using the product, how people are benefiting from the product. So as a brand on the social side, I would make sure that somebody can go on your page and clearly see that you have cultivated a community of people that really just rock with your brand and also the product that your brand has. That's number one. Also, two, you want to make sure, it's kind of like looking in the mirror. Like, you want to make sure that the brand that you're supporting is an accurate representation of who you are as a person. So you don't want to support a brand that supports things that you don't support. So if you're looking for people that are in a certain area or in a certain niche, you want to make sure that your brand is accurately depicting things that they support that align with that. So if you're trying to get LGBTQ influencer, you want to make sure that your brand is posting things that shows that, hey, like, we are in support of this community. Here's how we're advocating for them, X, Y, and Z. So just making sure that everything is aligned and that the influencer that you want to work with, they can see themselves in their feed.
I love that. And we're closing out here. So James, do you have any final words for all these fantastic people who sat with us for the last 90 minutes? We had a great retention rate, which I love, which means all of you were so fantastic. And just some final words for everyone who joined us today.
Yeah. So, first, thank you to the advisory board. And to Brittany, we've been learning so much from all of y'all since July when we first met, and really excited to share that with clients. Yeah, I think that for us, like the parting insight here or call is that, for Fohr, diversity in our campaigns has been important for years and a focus for years, because it was working so much better. It was because a lot of times the Black influencers we were working with were outperforming other influencers, multiple times. And so it was, you can also get inspired to get better at this and to understand these communities more, because there's a lot of value in there. Obviously the buying power of the Black community is enormous. And, every important cultural, every kind of important cultural touchstone or milestone in America comes mostly from Black culture. Like, this is, if your brand is trying to connect with culture and youth culture, like you have to understand this culture. And to do that, you have to let people in and give them a seat at the table, and let them be part of that strategy. And I think for us, it's been a journey in kind of helping our clients to do that. And with the advisory board, and Brittany, with you as well, we're excited to just continue getting better and working on.
Well, fantastic. There, as we've been saying, will be a resource guide that gets sent out, and there will also be a replay of this. So thank you so much, Danye. Thank you so much, James. And thank you to everyone from the advisory board and Fohr who are part of this discussion. And thank you to the audience for participating. This is why we'll move the needle forward. So everyone, have a great evening, and we'll catch you on the replay.